Okay, let's start. Fine. So yesterday, I think we just started with servlet. Fine. Understanding about servlet. Fine. So what did we see yesterday? We saw that we have a concept of a servlet container. Fine. Uh, there are some servers like Tomcat, which are implementation of servlet specification, and therefore they are the servlet container. Fine. Okay, and then we another thing which we had seen was we have a structure for our web applications. Fine, there is a structure for our web application. So there is a specific directory structure for our web application. When we develop a web application, it would have several resources. Okay, fine. So what are the resources in a web application? Okay, so for your web application, you should create a folder. Okay, so I have a folder for a web application, and within the folder, so we have a web application folder. Okay, so we let me put it as we have an app folder. Okay, so in app folder, whatever is there, fine, anything which is available within this is a resource. Everything here is a resource which will be accessible by a URL which says http:// the host where you have deployed this application folder. Okay, you have deployed the application folder in some host. So that host, okay, probably you may have to specify a port number also. Fine, and then slash the app folder name, whatever is the app folder. Okay, and slash anything which is here that can be given here. Okay, that's how you access the various resources which are within your application folder. This would normally be non-Java, fine, other things other outside of Java. Okay, fine. Now for anything which is to be, you still have certain components. Let's say the configuration about your application itself, find a lot of information which is not there as a resource, but it is going to be part of your, it's not directly a resource, helps in a resource, right? So any such information, fine, is also available, fine, is going to be managed within your app folder. So within the app folder, we have a folder called web-INF. Okay, so this folder is a private folder for our web application. So any web application has a private folder. By private folder, what is meant is, if someone tries to access this, web.inf is a private folder, and therefore if anyone tries to access the same thing and says, okay, let me have this app folder, and then says web.inf or anything within web.inf, anything here, okay, with web.inf, that should be not accessible. Fine, for the user it's not available as a URL. So it's other things are available as a URL. Fine, where the URL would be host, and then in the resource name you start with the application name slash the resources. That's how you access, but this is something which is not accessible with a URL. Fine, so not available to the end user for download. It's not there as a resource directly. Okay, again within this there are a few important folders. Okay, a few important files. One of the files here, the file here is the web.xml file known as the deployment descriptor. Fine, it's a description of what Java components we are having. Fine, it's a description of our application. And it's some configuration, fine, it's a deployment descriptor for our application. Deployment specific things can be here. Okay, there's a structure, it's an XML, there is a structure about what kind of tags are available in the XML file here. Okay, fine. So yesterday I think we looked at those tags also, and then there are two other folders within this. Yes, there is one folder called classes, Okay, and this is the place where the Java side, find the server side Java components, all those class files for them, they would be organized in the classes folder, and if you are using some libraries which are available as jar file, then they should be organized in a folder called lib. Okay, fine. So anything is which is here is going to be available to the application. See, normally in a standard Java application, fine, which is not a server based, right? When we write our application, we write a main method, fine. The classes are normally loadable from where? Which classes are available to us? The classes which are in the class path. Fine, we use that -cp option to specify a class path. Here, there is also an environment variable called class path where you can list those paths. Then you don't need a -cp option. Okay, here in case of a container, web container, when the server is running, it's not going to use your class path setting. Okay, so if I say, okay, I'll have my servlet classes, I'll have my Java components which are used by the servlet container, I'm putting them in the class path, so they should be available. No, they won't be. Okay, this folder, classes folder, is like it is becoming part of the class path. The lib folder, the files, the jar files in the lib folder are included, like it's like including them in the class path for the purpose of your application. Okay, fine. So you consider them like this. Fine. So classes and lib folder, that's a place where we have the loading of classes possible. Fine. So classes can be loaded from here. Okay. Fine. So that's the purpose. Yeah.
In classes folder,
Yeah.
the class are there, which is a developer.
Yeah.
So if we use a JSP, then where JSP files?
Okay, JSP. Now, okay, if you have JSP, what is JSP? It's more like a, it's more like a HTML. So you can keep it in the public area also, and you can keep it in a public area, and someone can access it as JSP, just like you access HTML. Fine, that's one option. Fine. The other options, you can put it here. See, another thing, when I say this is a private folder, these are some things which are standardized. There is a web.xml, there is a classes folder, there is a lib folder. And some developer says, oh, I would like to be creating some files on my server for temporary purpose, but they would not be available as a URL, and they should not be available for download. Fine. Or fine, I keep some data files, so I might create a folder called data where under WEB-INF, and I might have a folder called data under WEB-INF. It's up to you how you want to use it, but these are some standard things. Okay, so that way someone says, okay, I'll have my JSP files in a folder called JSP under WEB-INF, but of course they won't be available as a URL. If you keep a JSP outside the WEB-INF, it would be available as a URL.
So sir, in one application folder only one web.inf.
For one application, okay, we can't have two files with the same name. Right?
So अगर कोई ज़्यादा फाइल्स हो तो दूसरा web.inf क्रिएट करने की जरूरत नहीं, उसमें ही डाल देने का.
Yes.
web.inf.
Fine. And then we are looking at the tags within the web.xml file. And some of the tags, yes. What were the tags we had seen? There's a tag called web app. That's a top level tag. Okay. So everything goes within web app and /web app. And within web app we have the tag called something like display name. Okay, these are only some of the tags. They are not the full exhaustive list of all the tags here. So you can have a display name and /display name. Okay, this will be used within some administrative tool. Fine. Corresponding to every web application, the app folder, fine, application which has been deployed, we have an object of servlet context being created. Okay, and there is a object of servlet context also being created. So web app, find this web app here. For that, you will have one object of servlet context. Okay. Okay, fine. On this object of servlet context, there are methods available. So there's a method called get servlet context name, which would give us the display name. Okay, this information is available. Fine. Same way. Now, what are the other tags we have? Tag is context-param, fine, within which we had param-name, some parameter name, and a corresponding param-value. Slash context param. So this is nothing but some kind of an initialization parameter which you would like to have for your application. Fine. Any initialization parameter. For example, we might like to use it for keeping database connection related information. Fine. Okay. So such things. Fine. Specific to the application which has been deployed. So when you deploy an application at one place, yes, you will have some particular database, how to connect to that database, fine. So for that, whatever parameters are needed, we will include here. Okay, fine. It will be different in different locations when it is deployed in a different place. Okay, fine. So keep it here. Fine. So these are okay. So in servlet context, we have methods, two methods, one called get init parameter names, which gives us the list of all the parameter names, context param names, and get init parameter. Given a parameter name, the corresponding value can be fetched. Okay, those two were the methods of servlet context. Okay. Fine, then, yeah, what's the other kind of entry? This is something which can repeat. Then the other kind of entry is, we have the servlet entry. Okay, fine, this is an entry, yeah, what is the entry? This is the entry for asking the container to create an object. Fine, asking the container to create an object. So here, this object would be identified by some name. So we have a tag, inner tag called servlet name. Fine, use a servlet name. Okay, and specify the class whose object needs to be created. We have servlet class. Now whatever class you give must be a class which implements the servlet interface. And this must be a class which has an implementation of servlet interface. Fine. We either can use servlet class entry, or what's the other option? It's one of them, not both. Okay, either you say servlet class, or what's the other option to this? You may use, the other option is JSP file. When you say JSP file, you should start with a slash. Okay, for example, let's say we don't want to keep our JSP file as a publicly available, fine, not in the public area, but you want to keep it under WEB-INF. So maybe under WEB-INF folder, Okay, so under WEB-INF, you might have created a folder called JSP, and within the JSP you have your JSP file. Suppose that's the case, yes, here you will start with a slash. The slash here corresponds to the root of your folder. So within my folder, within my application, where? So within my application, okay, I'm keeping it under WEB-INF, and then within WEB-INF, I have the folder called JSP, and there's some .jsp file here. That's option. Fine. So when you give JSP file, you have to actually specify the location starting with a slash. Clear? This would always start with a slash if you are giving a JSP file. And the location where you have your JSP file within the application folder. Okay, the slash corresponds to the root of your application. So either servlet class or this, it's one of these two. Okay, fine, not both, it's only one of them. Fine. So you've developed it as a Java file, you have created a class implementing the servlet interface, use servlet class. If you have written a JSP file, use JSP file.
We take any name of servlet class.
Yeah. Okay, so servlet name can be anything. Okay, that's the object's name. Okay, fine. And then for this servlet or JSP, okay, we would like it to have some initialization parameters. Okay, we would like it to have some initialization parameters, and those can be specified with init-param tag. So we have the init-param tag having the inner tag called param-name and param-value. Fine. So we have a init-param entry for every parameter you want. So you can repeat this, fine. You can have as many number of initialization parameters, but these are specific to this servlet. They are not going to be available to other components. Fine. They are going to be available to this particular servlet only. Whereas the context param is something which is available at the application level. So all Java components, fine, which are created by the container would have a mechanism to get access to the context param names, but not for this. For this, only this particular component which has been created. Okay, so create this object of the class, and for that I have some parameters. So for this object which is identified by a servlet name, okay, I have these parameters. Clear? You have parameters available for this particular object. Okay, so you can have as many number of init params as you like. Okay, fine. And then there is another parameter called load on startup. Okay, and a slash load on startup. There will be some number like 1, 2, 3, 4 like this. Fine. This is nothing but specifying, fine, the order in which these servlets may be loaded. These object, it's, see, when we mention this, what is going to happen? When we make a servlet entry, it's going to create object of that class and then initialize it. For initialization, we have actually a lifecycle method being invoked. So at the startup, fine, that initialization must be done. That's what you're saying when you say load on startup. Okay, create object and initialize it. Yeah.
How to load on startup method used by servlet name or servlet class? We take any parameter to load.
No, just say load on startup for that entry.
Okay. Yeah. So container load its.
When the, see, container is going to read this.
Okay.
Container does the things according to what you have mentioned here. So container, so you are asking container, create object of this class, Okay, fine, identify by this, and when the application, whenever the application is started, you need to load it at that time itself. Don't delay it. I want it to be loaded at the beginning itself. Fine. Okay, and then you might have a slash servlet. Okay, so that's one servlet entry. Fine. What the container is doing at this time? For this servlet entry, what does it do?
Create two objects. One is blank buffer and other.
Yeah. What does the container do when we have a servlet entry? Yeah. When the container will come across a servlet entry, what will it do? First thing, what does a container do when it comes across a web app entry? It creates an object of servlet context.
Yes.
And fine. Web app means one object of servlet context. Servlet means one object of. The information within this has to be available. Yeah. One object of. The object of servlet config would have all this information. Fine. The object of servlet config would have all this information. Okay. And that should be made available to, then it would also create the object of whatever is your servlet class. And that object has to be made available all this information. Fine. These are container. These are container components, servlet context, servlet config. They are container developers component. Fine, they are containers component developed by the container developer. Okay, and servlet is our web application developers component, which is developed by web application developer. Fine, the web application developer needs to know and interact with the container. It wants to know information what has been given in the deployment descriptor. Fine, there is some administrator whose role is to have a proper web.xml file. He is administering your application. Clear? There are many roles here. Clear? Separate roles. Fine. You give an application, it has to be deployed. Who will do that? An administrator. Fine. He deploys the application. Okay. Clear? The servlet component developer is a separate. Fine. That development. So that component developer would like to know what are the settings the administrator has for me. And these are nothing but settings. Right? Okay, so to make those settings available, we have those settings are available right at the time of initialization. The purpose of initialization is to make available all these settings to the servlet component, the component of the application developer. Fine. Clear? So we have all those servlet entries, multiple servlet entries. So yeah, you can now have a look. Okay, fine. This is one. So we're just going through the web.xml file, the web app, display name, context-param, fine, parameters for the application level. Then we have create one component of servlet. I'm giving you the class name. I'm giving you a Java file. Fine, and for that, remember it by this name, and for that these are my parameters. Okay, so those parameters available only to that component. Context parameters available to any component. Fine, any web component.
Context for all applications.
Yes, it's application wide. This is specific to this component, for this component. Okay, and how it happens? From objects point of view, if you look at the object level, okay, we'll come to the object level, I'll have a separate thing. But then these are components created. But when and how these components will be used would be decided by, because everything here, it's a web application, everything has to be mapped to, somehow it has to be linked to a URL. And this is a servlet, and I would like to use this servlet whenever this resource name is used. Fine, mapping a resource name, a URL rather, fine, with the component. So we have created several components which are web related components, servlet components, and corresponding to those servlet components we are saying, oh, we want what we have is servlet mapping, where we map the components which we created earlier. So you don't create a new name. In the servlet name here, we can't give a new name. It has to be one of the servlets which is existing. Fine, it has, this name has to come as some servlet name which is already there. Fine, which is there in the one of the servlet entries. So that particular servlet object to be used whenever we have a particular URL pattern. Fine, slash URL pattern and slash servlet mapping. So you create your servlet mappings. So this is like you are defining. See what is now, what are the URLs available? What is your web application? A web application is nothing but, from the user's point of view, it's made up of URLs. It is all these URLs are valid for me. Fine. What are all the URLs? You have static contents, HTML, everything which is in the public area, plus these URL patterns. You have these URL patterns. Fine. So you are defining the URLs here. Here you are just defining the URLs for your application and mapping them to a particular component.
So web application developer will write the web.xml, web.xml.
Initially yes, but an administrator can change his things.
Yeah.
Fine, it's the administrator who would be actually managing this application. Fine, he may like to change some context parameters. Fine, fine, and even he will say, okay, I don't want this particular servlet to be used. I don't want that URL. I want another URL for this. Okay, I think it has to be a mix of both. It can't be just an administrator. He has to be having a good knowledge about the application as well.
Application.
The components, basically, he should be having the knowledge about the components.
Okay.
Right? What is the purpose of each component? Fine. So maybe he wants to use the same component multiple times, or he wants to use multiple URLs, but he is the one who is defining the URLs for the application. Fine. So web XML, yes, I'll put it, yes, it's application developer as well as administrator.
In fact, if we think then in a like, crucial manner, then administrator only is the deciding factor how the application will behave for outside world.
Yes. Web XML is the deciding factor.
Okay. Web XML has the entire control of the
how it is going to be decided.
It's a bridge between client and application itself.
Yeah. Now, only thing is from we have this since Java 7 or 8, but in later stages, right, we have something called annotations which have come. Okay. So there are annotations available. So annotations are something which you use within your class file. So when you write a servlet class, okay, you can put an annotation there saying, okay, this particular thing is a servlet class and that's a URL for it. You could put it in your servlet class itself. Okay, so when we deploy the application, okay, on the start of the application, like it would load the application, we'll say, okay, I have a start of my application. Fine. the container would scan all the classes for that particular annotation, and then that is used for deciding the mapping also.
Okay. So
Okay, but one thing, if you have some mapping which is specified using annotation and you also have a web XML, the web XML has a precedence.
okay. So, but if this part, servlet
Yeah.
dash mapping,
Mhm.
servlet name and
Is-
URL pattern,
Uh-huh.
this can be committed if it is written in the class.
In the class, yes. If you have
This
an
can be
annotation,
omitted,
if you,
right?
yes, you may not have this.
Okay.
You would not even put the servlet entry.
Okay.
It's like, no, very commonly people just used to have servlet name, servlet class and servlet mapping.
Okay.
There were no parameters or anything.
Okay.
Okay, such cases, fine, use annotation.
So if we precisely use annotations
Yeah.
and accurately use annotations, then we can forget to write on a web XML.
Yes.
Okay. So and all components of web XML will be can be annotated in the application.
No. For example, context-param,
Will not be
No.
annotated in the.
because you don't write anything for your,
Okay.
you only write servlets. See,
So basic web XML
Yeah.
will remain there, which
Yes.
will not have servlet.
servlet entries, yes.
Servlet entries.
The entry for servlet may not be there. Okay. Fine. But anyway, if there is a servlet entry, that overrules any annotation. Fine. So ultimately, yes, we can say it's web XML, and this is much better, right? Rather than having something in a Java file which you'll need to recompile if you want to change. You'll need to recompile if you want to change. Here, oh, just make the change and that's it. Clear? Should not require a recompiling, right? I want to change the URL. Should I be recompiling my
So this is
Java
sort
file?
of a menu. This is sort of a menu.
Yes, URLs are menus. Correct. Right? Okay, fine. So purpose is clear. Now, fine. This is just a tags we have seen. Okay, and we are not introducing any new tags currently. Okay, but just okay. Then you'll have your /web app. Okay, that's fine. Fine. So going through it again. What we have, let's keep a big container today. Yeah. So we have a container. Fine. When the container starts, it is looking for deployed web applications. For every web application which is deployed, it creates object of the servlet context. Okay, this is per application. Fine. Okay. In this web application, we have a web XML file and it mentions about a few servlet entries. If there are servlet entries, it's going to be creating object of servlet config. Okay, the servlet config keeps a reference to the servlet context. Maybe you have multiple, let's say we have two of them. So we have two servlet config and they both map to they both have the same servlet context. They are part of this web application. Okay, so you got your context params loaded available here. You got the init-param of your servlet entry loaded and available here. Fine. You got your servlet name, that's here. Each is separate. The servlet entry has servlet name, it has init parameter. Therefore, what the servlet config is having? It is having the servlet name, it is having the init parameters, it is having the servlet context. So we have four methods only. Servlet config is only four methods. What are those 4 methods? Getting the servlet name, okay, getting the servlet context, and for the init parameter, getting the list of all the init parameters, get init parameter names, and for a given init parameter, getting the corresponding value, get init parameter, which takes a string as parameter. Just 4 methods for servlet config. Okay, but it is making available also the servlet context, and in servlet context, some of the methods which we have seen, get servlet context name, that display name can be known, get servlet context name, then get init parameter names, those context param entries, they can be seen. Okay, and then our component of servlet also has to be created, so that servlet object would now be created whenever it decides to initialize. Fine, it would be creating object of
On start or on demand?
on the first demand.
On the first.
Fine, that load on startup. Fine, so we have the object of servlet being created using its public no argument constructor. So don't put constructors. Fine, if you don't put constructor, a public no argument constructor will be available for your class. Fine, so you have the public no argument constructor available, that's what you should ensure. If you are writing constructor, it's only the public no argument constructor which you are writing, if at all you are writing, but there shouldn't be a need for a constructor in servlet.
Sir, it's like a default constructor. If we
Yeah.
do not use a constructor, then it use default constructor.
Yes,
So if we decide some parameter constructor,
it won't be called.
it won't be a servlet itself.
It won't
be
be.
a servlet.
If you put a constructor, you should still be having a public no argument constructor then.
That I understood, sir.
Huh.
if
But yeah,
we
that
decide-
particular constructor would not be ever used.
Okay.
It's not going to be used at least by the container.
Container. So it
The way container works, no, it's not going to call that.
Fundamentally, it will not work as servlet.
Yeah, someone may be using it. Someone may, see, it's still a class only, right?
So
Someone
it
says,
can be-
let me create the object of servlet. Okay, someone can still be calling it and using it as a object. Fine. Like any other object of any other class, or let me call the constructor. Fine. But that's not what the servlet is for. The servlet is meant to be created by, the object of servlet is meant to be created by the container only. Okay, and then create the object and then
Then create
initialization. What is the initialization? Pushing the config object into the servlet object.
yes.
This is with the help of, so invocation of the method called init. The first lifecycle method for a servlet is init. Returns void. Name of the method is, okay, the parameter here is servlet config. Okay, this has a throws. It has throws for servlet exception, and there's actually, they've listed one more exception here in the throws, which is related to, again, which is actually a subclass of the servlet exception. There's one subclass of the servlet exception. This is related to basically that it cannot be loaded. Let me recollect that exception name. Just quick look at the API. Fine. Simple one. Then we have the Java X.Servlet package. We have the method and we have the, okay, it has a throws for servlet exception, and one of the exceptions there is actually the we have this exception called unavailable exception, and it's a subclass of the servlet exception. Fine, we have this exception called the unavailable exception. The idea here is, fine, it could be, so one of the subclasses of servlet exception is the unavailable exception. See, maybe when you create the object at startup, fine, in the initialization, what you might also be doing is, okay, I have to initialize, for me to be servicing, right? Later it's going to be available for servicing, right? For servicing request. For myself to be able to service the request, I need to be able to connect to a database. I need certain resources here. This servlet is dependent on certain resources, but some of the resources have failed. They are not available. Fine. And if the user is saying, I want to access this particular servlet, fine, rather than giving an error at that time by first coming the request comes to the container, and then container says, okay, let me invoke the method on this particular servlet. The servlet on startup says, I'm not available. When the servlet says I'm not available in the init method, okay, the container has two options. One thing is definite, container is not going to use this now. It has an option of retrying the init method after some time. It has the option of retrying the init method initialization again after some time. If it again throws, fine, maybe I'll keep on trying it after some particular amount of time, so that it becomes available. But one important thing from the user's point of view, when a URL is struck which matches this, the servlet would not be involved at all. The container there itself says this is not available. Okay, there's some it's not 404, but it's something else which says it's not available, unavailable. Okay, there's a different response, and the container at its level is taking care without coming to the servlet at all.
Because it knows that it has not been used.
Yeah, the servlet has already conveyed. I can't work. Clear? Init method has a throws, they say servlet exception, but one of the subclasses unavailable exception. Fine, you can see what's there in the unavailable exception. If you look at it, oops, sorry. We had those. 1 second. See, when you create an unavailable exception, fine, you have the option of giving a timeout. I think fine, is permanent, that's another boolean. So you implement this. Let's see the constructor thing. Yeah, in constructor, fine, when you create the object of unavailable exception, okay, those are deprecated constructors, but then here we have, fine, you specify a message and seconds. Construct a new exception with a descriptive message indicating that the servlet is temporarily unavailable and giving an estimate of how long it will be unavailable.
So this will be decided by container itself.
This is who will be creating this? The init method of the servlet would throw this. Container is getting this. See, who is invoking the init method? Container. So container gets a message from the servlet.
The duration in the seconds.
Yes.
How it will come to a judgment that 15 seconds.
Whose judgment? It's the judgment of servlet.
Servlet.
Servlet creates this object and throws it in the init method.
So servlet is written by us.
Yes.
So that seconds and all parameters we will write.
Yes, you decide.
Okay. So how many times it will be reattempted?
For how long? Yeah, after how long?
How long? That will be written by us.
Yes. But then it's up to the container. We have given an indication. It's up to the container to decide whether it would like to still try after that time or not. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So administrator can decide that in container configuration or container
No.
independent logic.
This is servlet doing it.
This is servlet
not
doing.
administrator.
This is servlet doing, but the container will decide from its side
Yes.
that when to try again.
It's a container
If
developer.
container is busy,
It's container developer, not to the administrator at all.
Okay.
There's no
Container-
parameter, there's no configuration,
Okay, so container
settable
developer
things.
is a Tomcat developer.
It's a Tomcat developer who has it. So there is Tomcat or JRun, and we don't know what is done by JRun, what's done by Tomcat.
So they have
JBoss
their own-
or anything,
They have
yeah.
their own logic.
They have-
when to try or when not to try.
Huh.
And we cannot force them explicitly that try again,
No.
or something like that. Not the administrator, not the web developer, not the
Yeah.
client. Okay. So independent agency,
Yes.
government agency, जब मर्जी पड़ेगी तब.
It's the server which we have used. Fine. So you have decided the server. You have decided to use Tomcat.
એટલે હોસ્પિટલમાં કઈ હોસ્પિટલ આપણે નક્કી કરીએ પણ પછી આઈસીયુ માં આપણો કોઈ કંટ્રોલ નથી. બરાબર ને?
Fine, clear? Init method. So first lifecycle method is init. Fine. Giving this option of unavailable thing also. Okay. Next. So this is one thing which is going to happen. Let's come back. Okay, unavailable exception actually is a subclass of the servlet exception. So that's the init, okay?
Yes.
Fine. So yeah, what happens with init? A servlet config is given to the servlet object, right? And normally the implementation should keep the servlet object because it also needs to implement which other method? The method which returns servlet config. We have the method called get servlet config, okay, without parameter. And this implementation is simple. If the first method is going to store the configuration object, second method is going to return that. Okay, and then fine, they keep on waiting. Fine, it becomes ready, available for servicing. The server would be ready once it has initialized every applications, every component. You have several applications. For every application, it would have to do this exercise of looking at the web.xml, creating those components, initializing them, calling the init method. Okay, fine. Now it is ready to take any request. Okay, whenever a request would come to the container, what is the first thing the container has to do? Look at the URL and identify the application first.
Application
Fine. And within that application, which component?
server mapping.
servlet mapping in that application.
Servlet mapping.
Fine. Within that application, which component? Fine. And on that servlet component, it would invoke the method service. Fine. So we have the void method. Method name is service with two parameters, a servlet request and a servlet response. And this also has the throws for servlet exception, comma, IO exception. Okay, servlet exception, IO exception, these are the two throws which we have in the service method. Okay, again, while servicing also, you can throw unavailable exception to become unavailable. See, with unavailable, servlet will not be involved when this URL comes later. Control, knowledge is given to the container. At the container level itself, it should take care. That is the idea.
सर अगर हमें पता नहीं है कि इसमें ये एक्सेप्शन यूज होता है तो हम सुपर क्लास एक्सेप्शन भी यूज कर सकते हैं डायरेक्ट.
In this implementation, see why we are saying this servlet exception, it's not only for that unavailable exception thing only. Okay, what we have is in this what you will be using, you might be using some method on servlet request. So you are saying, oh, I want to read that parameter. Now who's written that implementation? Who has written the class for servlet request? Servlet request is interface. Who's written that class?
Application.
No. Application developer has only written the servlet. The servlet request, servlet response objects, their implementation, its job. In servlet request, the job is to make available the information which has come from the client. Who has received it? Container. Container is writing the implementation of this. Okay, and that method invocation for some reason fails. It's going to throw a, fine, within this you are saying, okay, well let me try to get that parameter value. But that parameter, getting that parameter value can fail because of something which has gone wrong. Fine. Okay, that's known only to the container. Right. So this servlet exception, it is saying throw servlet exception, you will need it not only because you want to throw it, but because you are using some interaction with the components of the container. Okay, fine. When you start invoking methods on servlet request, servlet response, those methods have a throws for servlet exception. And therefore you will need a throws here, or you will need a try catch. Fine. Some of those also have the IO exception being thrown. Okay, so we have the service method, which is the regular invocation. Fine. And then we have the method for destroy. Okay. Yeah, another important thing about destroy now. Doesn't have a throws. I think throws servlet exception may be there. But one thing about destroy. The destroy method would be invoked when? When the servlet is being taken out of service. Okay, when the servlet is being taken out of service. Okay, fine. See, it can take time for the destroy method to finish. It can take time for the destroy method to finish. right?
Sir, is it not destroy after service completion
No.
automatically?
અને પછી
નહીં.
જે સર્વિસ આવે ત્યારે એને તે મોજૂદ રહેવું પડે. રિક્વેસ્ટ તો એક પછી જાય કે નહીં?
Initialization done.
Yes.
Okay. Now wait.
Yes. Wait.
First client has requested. What happens? For this client, create a request and response object,
Yes.
make and invoke service method. Another client also makes a request for the same component. Then again, because this is a separate client, has to be a separate request, he will be given a separate response given to the service method. So one invocation of initialization, fine, giving it so that it gets connected to the container, making it connected to the container, right? With servlet config, it gets connected to the container. And then regular invocation of, it's only service method. It's only service method which is used all the time.
No
But
destroy.
when the destroy will come, let's see. Now, for administration purpose, you'll say, okay, this application should be shut down.
Okay.
As an administrator, you'll say, oh, let me shut down that application. So what will be done? What will be done? A proper shutdown? Because I have this servlet request, I have this servlet object which has taken up some system resources. In the initialization, what I have done is I have made a connection to the server, to a database, right? Or I might have occupied some resources. Fine, I keep those resources. I'm not releasing them. But then I'm not going to be used, and therefore I need to release them. And therefore we have the destroy method being invoked. Fine. See, the destroy method is invoked on this, and then the server has to wait for some time. Give the container, give the application sufficient time. It would be again container dependent. It has to give the time to the destroy method to finish. Fine. Another thing, sorry. Yeah. When I say I want to destroy this application, it would actually, before it calls destroy, sorry, even before it calls destroy, it has a little bit of time. It gives a little bit of time, thinking that there are some service methods which may still be working on it. There are some service methods which may still be active. Fine. And this is some time which the container is deciding. We don't have any control over that. So container on its own gives a little time before the service method is called.
So it may be a minute or 2 or 5,
Whatever.
whatever.
Some little bit time, yes. Which the container has felt is sufficient for service, any active service methods. If there are active service methods, so when we say destroy, fine, when we are saying shutdown, at that time, normally, it is because it's giving some time. Okay, normally it can fine. It should be okay that service methods have finished before the destroy has started. But it can, in rare cases, there might be some service method which is still active for longer time. It's taking longer, and while the service is still on, a destroy method may also be getting invoked on it. Fine. So keep that in mind. While the service is still on,
So, sir,
we have the container saying, okay, I'm destroying it,
Wait.
but service may not have finished. So that particular servicing may give unpredictable things. It all depends on what is there in the service method, what the service method is doing.
so sir,
But this has to be kept in mind.
when invoke the destroy method, servlet only close the services or destroy all servlet?
Servlet is not going, see, there are multiple threads.
Yes.
Those threads are working independently.
Yes.
So they are used for servicing my, calling the service method. So some service method is still active. That's a separate thread. And then someone says, I want to shut down. When someone says, I want to shut down, it's going to call destroy. But before it calls destroy, it is giving a little time for the service method to finish. If there are any active service methods, it would not know how many are there, whether they have all finished or not. Okay, tries to give some time to them before it starts to destroy. Okay. Clear?
Yes.
Okay. Fine. So that's the life cycle method. 3 life cycle methods. What are the 3 life cycle methods? Init, service, and destroy. Okay. Other 2 methods. There are 2 other methods. Which are those?
Services.
One is get servlet config,
Yes.
and the other is
String. Yes.
yes, get servlet info, returns a string. Fine. You may use this to, you may override this to return a copyright message for your servlet, some information about the servlet. Fine. Normally you'll say, okay, servlet, what is the name of the servlet class, copyright, and some year or whatever. Fine. It's up to you to decide what you want to return. Fine.
So
it's not a lifecycle method anyway.
Return to user or developer.
It's not return. It's to anyone.
Okay.
Whoever calls.
Fine. Maybe some container. Fine. You might have some container. For example, in the administrative tool, we are only seeing the application level things, right? We are saying, oh, these are the applications. Maybe there might be a container which says, okay, I'll also show you all the servlet components which I have created, which is currently running. Okay, maybe going to a finer level to try to give you all the servlet components which are currently active. When it's giving that list of servlets, it might give the servlet info. Right? Like the display name, which is being shown in the administrative tool. Okay, fine. So that's some place where it may probably be used. Fine. And the servlet name and the servlet info, 2 things may be used. Okay, fine. So that's about the life cycle of a servlet. Okay, now we can think about what? Want to write a first servlet? Fine. How do we write a servlet? But yeah, before that, we should also know about. See what we have seen so far. Let me try to list the components as we come across them. Okay. First thing, what are the various? Let's try to list the components
From the day one or cycle.
from yeah. So we have first
Request.
servlet
Context.
Then servlet config.
Fine. Then we have
Servlet config.
okay. We have the servlet config.
Then servlet itself.
Okay, servlet is our component. Yeah, that's anyway. So servlet. Okay, fine. Let's list that. Servlet. Then
From client side, HTTP request and a buffer HTTP response.
so not HTTP. It's a
Servlet request
servlet request object
and servlet response.
and servlet response. These are all interfaces.
So when
And this is something which the developer is creating. Other things, container.
So when an HTTP request reaches to a container, it is converted into servlet request and servlet response.
It allocates a buffer, empty buffer, and puts a servlet response object and makes these available using the service method to the servlet object.
So as a developer, we will develop servlets. As an administrator, somebody will write XML, where an application developer will contribute.
Application mainly by application developer, but yes,
But the administrator.
the control is with the administrator.
The administrator. Okay. And servlet in turn will call the basic classes, the entity classes.
Will use whatever it wants, the way it wants, right? We have service classes.
Service classes. those classes will be known as service classes. Sublet. Okay.
Fine. From the service method, it will interact with the application. I'll put it that way. The application components.
So
There is a web application, but this is web interface, right? This is just a web interface.
this is web interface. So if I, as a like at a core level, if I understand that if we have to calculate the simple interest, the parameters will come from client. Then
Okay.
the,
So that's available from servlet request.
Principal, duration, interest rate, and everything.
Uh-huh.
It will come to as an HTTP request. Container will convert it into servlet request and allocate the servlet response.
Huh.
Then it will call a service method on a servlet where say simple interest calculator servlet, and
Okay.
it will call the service method. Within the service method, as an application developer, servlet developer, we have written whatever that these are the parameters, and
That you'll get the parameters input by the
servlet
client
yeah.
from the request object.
Request object.
Huh.
Then
Use them,
that will
fetch those,
So we
give it to your component. You have your application component,
Okay. So service
which does the calculation.
So service will have a method where as parameter servlet request will go, and in turn servlet request will have all the parameters which we require to send to service class.
Yes.
So service class is like a simple interest
Calculator.
So I will like
Invoke the method.
I will
You have
invoke the
method of calculator.
Service class
Calculator.
Calculator dot calculate and provide all these
Parameters received from the request.
Response will come and
It will return. The method is a return value. What is the interest?
whatever interest say.
So that return
double
value,
or something,
that return value, you will format, put it in the response buffer.
the response buffer. Okay. So at that time in servlet response में मैं as a
That's it.
string रखूंगा.
You decide. You want to have
that I will
a
decide.
how you want to format. It's your buffer. You, what is the content you want to send to the
Okay.
client?
So
You fill the content for me.
okay, if
And
we
tell.
consider the roles, then there will be a separate role. If we consider the large organization, then the service class developer will be different. Servlet
A web page designer would also be involved.
Pardon?
A web page designer.
That will be the
How the formatting of the
so
response
there's
will
an
be done.
interface designer. So he will be independently work as an
And that is the JSP.
that is JSP. Okay. So there will be 4 to 5 people.
And there are so many roles as I mentioned. So all roles are there. And you play a different role each time. Right? There are so many roles involved. Right? Fine, we'll go step by step. Okay? Yeah. Fine. We'll keep on changing our views as we go along. And we'll see more things. Okay. Fine. So, and now let's list whatever methods we know for each of them. Fine. Each of those components. Purpose, we have the servlet context. Okay. Let's see what are the methods we have in the servlet context. Yeah. First thing, returning a string. Okay. Name of the method, get servlet context name. Gives us, this is giving us display name. And that display name attribute, we have display name entry in the web.xml, that's available. This is from servlet context. What else? Those context param, and we have the context param. So we have enumeration of string get init parameter names. Fine. What are all the context parameters? We have a method to return a string get init parameter, takes a string, the context parameter name, pname, fine, returns a string and corresponding parameter value. Fine. Clear? This we know, understand from, this comes from web.xml. Okay, we have more information. Okay, what's the name of the server? Get server. Let's get the exact method names here. Fine, we'll try to look at the what are the things which we can understand at this moment. Okay, let's skip the things which, and I'll just straight away go for, I'll just only mention those methods which will be useful at this moment. Okay, fine. Now, we have this method called get context path. Okay, we have also a method called get context path. What is this method? The get context path method returns okay, they have not given the details, but the get context path is for returning the name slash application name, just slash and the application name. It returns a string. Fine. The get context path returns a string. Okay, we'll put it in our list. Return string get context path. Okay, no parameters. This is the web application. Fine. There's a path which is used for reaching this application on the host. So that part is here. Fine. For example, slash inventory. You have application, your web folder name, application folder name, slash and that application folder name. So that's what would be context path. Okay, more methods. Fine, we know about the get init parameter names and get init parameter, and those two methods we have already listed. Okay. We have this method called get major version and get minor version, returns int. Servlet specifications have various versions. Okay, so we have this method called returns int get major version and get minor version. Fine, get major version, get minor version. Fine, for example, if you are using a particular version of Tomcat, fine, that Tomcat is an implementation for which specification version? Okay, the latest version is 4.0. At this moment, the latest version is 4.0. Fine, if you are saying, okay, I want to use Tomcat 8, or Tomcat 8 is 3.1. Okay, it's 3.1. The earlier version is 3.1. Now we have Tomcat 9. So it all depends, right? Which specification version, because according to the specification version, you would have maybe additional classes, interfaces available in your API. Okay, it's just a small thing, right? Okay, what is the major version and minor version for? So major version is 3, minor version is 1, 3.1. Okay, version 3.1. We have another method to return a string, get Mime Type for a given string, which is a file name. If you give a file name, the extension of that file name will be used to determine what should be the Mime type. For example, if the file name extension is .html, it would say Mime type is text/html.
And if it is doc,
Whatever is the appropriate thing, it might be saying application/word. Fine. It's at Mime type. Mime type is something slash. Okay. So application/word is more likely, but we'll need to check, right? Okay, fine. So whatever this container understands, it may not be the container may not have an exhaustive list. So whatever this container understands from that, it's not going to go to the web and use some RFC to find out what that list is. Okay, but container would have some predefined things, whatever is known to it.
if there is a file extension XYZ
Yeah.
C,
Mhm.
then it will give error also. There is no known Mime type.
Okay, get Mime type. Let's see this. Fine, returns a Mime type. It doesn't have a throws anyway. Specified by file or null, it would return a null. Fine. If the Mime type is not known. Okay. Determined by the configuration of the servlet container and may be specified in web application deployment descriptor. So we have a tag in web.xml where we can say this Mime type, this extension is this type, this extension this type. So those kind of entries may be specified in WebXML.
There we have a control to define.
Okay, so you can contribute, you can add. Okay, fine. Few other methods.
And
We have that.
If there is a conflict, WebXML will place it.
The WebXML will?
Precedence will be to WebXML.
Yeah.
If
Yeah, its first is WebXML. Okay, now another method is get server info. This is where the server version information about the server. Oh, this is Apache Tomcat version so and so. Server's name. That's going to be available as get server info. And servlet context is our link to the container. Okay, fine. We even have, on the server. Okay, you want to read some file from the server. You are interested in reading a file from the server. Where will you keep such files? Which, let's understand that this file, we don't want it available as a URL. It's some data file which is useful for you. Where will you keep it? In WEB-INF of your application?
Yes.
Okay, so what you might do is you'll say, okay, oh, I want to read that. To read that, you'll need an input stream, maybe. You like to create an input stream to start reading?
Yes.
Okay, so we have this method called resource as stream, which takes as parameter a string. And S. It returns an input stream. So you can get an input stream to start reading from any resource. The content can be read for any resource. What is the format of this string? The string which you give here should be slash, and this slash corresponds to the root of your application. See, this servlet context is a application. This application has a folder. That folder is the slash here. Within this folder, anything which I want, I can create an input stream for that to start reading it. Right. So we have get resource. Sorry, the method is get resource. Get resource returns a get resource as string. Yeah, we did this, right? Get resource as string, a path, and it returns an input string. Yeah, that's what we did. So that's correct. Get resource as string. If you just say get resource, it would return a URL object. Okay, fine. Another useful method would be get real path. Yeah, this is the method get real path. Okay, what get real path does? Takes as parameter a string, which we simply say it's a URL, but let's see what exactly is here. It returns a string. Get real path. Okay, so for example, let me say I'm using Tomcat. Okay, I'm using Tomcat. Now, any resource. See, when we say get resource as string, the string which we gave, how do we specify that string? That's a path. How do we specify? We start with a slash. This slash is the root of the application. So we are not concerned with anything else. We are only looking at the folder of the application, and we only understand the folder. Within this folder of my application, this is what I am having. Okay, all this is what I am having. Right? So we are giving path with slash corresponding to the root of our application. But where is this actually physically available in my system? Okay, for example, suppose I'm using Tomcat. Okay, let me write a path here. Let's say I have a path which is saying the path which I use here is slash WEB-INF slash data. Okay, suppose I keep this as my path. Slash WEB-INF slash data. Okay, so this is what I use as my input, and what I'll get back as output will be a full-fledged path, exact path, physical path.
C drive mein hai to C slash.
Yes, wherever it is. If it's a Linux system, fine. Maybe you have slash home slash Tomcat, and you have Tomcat within that web app folder. Within web app folder, the folder for your application, and then slash WEB-INF. The actual real path is returned to us. So converts your path, which is relative to your application. You have a path for your application. Okay, path within the application into the actual real path. Fine. And of course, if it's a Windows platform, it would even return C:\\, those kind of things. Okay, depending on the platform. So this will depend even on the platform. It uses / or /, everything. It just depends on the platform. Okay. So this is the real path. So someone could use this path for creating maybe I want to create a file output stream. I want to create a new file. So I can use such path information. Okay, then I can open up a new file. Otherwise, I can't create a new file. Suppose I want to create a file on the server. I'll have to create a file output stream. But for creating file output stream, I must specify a string, the correct path. I don't have the path. That slash WEB-INF, that is not a path, which is not it's not a path to be used for creating a file output stream. And so you'll need the real path in such case. Okay. And so servlet context, it's your interaction with the container. Fine. Okay, let's just have a quick look at the other remaining things. And server info is one. Okay. Servlet context name, that's a display name. Okay, that we have seen already. And then we have the method called, okay, that's not useful. Okay, so deprecated methods will not look at. Okay, we have this method called log. Look at this method log. We have two log methods. One log method takes only the message, other log takes message and a throwable object, exception object.
Service create a log files.
It's not creating a log file, but your application, your container maintains a log. And it is maintaining a log. It's making entries in the log. Oh, I have started this, I have started this, I have all those things. Right? You would like to write into that same log. You want to write into the log of the container, make an entry in the log of the container with timestamp and everything. There's some format in which the log is managed. Okay, so if you want to make an entry in the log of the container, fine, we have the method called log. So there is this log to make an entry in the log of the container. Container has a log. Okay, so you can just say log parameters a string. The message returns void. Or you can just say log two parameters, message and your exception object. The type is throwable and that's your exception object. Return type void. And make an entry in the log of the container. Okay, fine. There's one more concept which I'll explain now. I'll have to come back to that container. Okay, now container, in the container, our servlet context object, and this is what we have seen the methods about, right? Okay, now this is also one common place for all the other web components. This is one common place. Now, some particular web components has created a useful information which it wants to share with other components. If it wants to share with other components, we have a mechanism by which objects can be managed here. You can keep a store of objects. Oh, I want to keep this object here so that anyone else can get that object. Okay, we call it as an attribute here. Attribute. I create an attribute, give a name and keep the object. Give a name and keep your objects. Okay, for example, you might have got the information about the JDBC. What is the information? How do I make a connection? Find the information. What are the parameters for making a connection? That information is something which is to be shared with everyone. Any component should be able to use it. Fine. So what do? I can keep it in my servlet context object. Give a name and keep it there. Okay, so if I have something to be shared at the application level, some objects to be shared at the application level, I can keep them in the servlet context object, and for that we have 4 methods to manage such objects. So objects can be managed within a servlet context by calling them as attributes. We call them as attributes. So we got these 4 set of methods. Now these 4 set of methods will appear in other places also, exactly same methods. The places where objects can be managed for the purpose of sharing with other components. It's not only the servlet context where we want to share our objects. So if we want to share our objects, okay, the method names, fine. So we have these 4 set of methods. First method, let's see, this is the method called set attribute. It's to create a place an object with the servlet context by giving it a name. So give a name and give the object. Any kind of object may be kept here. Set attribute, just keep an object into it. So storing an object by giving a name. Store an object by giving a name. That's an attribute. We have the method to return that object. Get attribute. Parameter, the name. You get that object by the name. If for this name some object was earlier stored, that would be available. If it's not stored, you'll get a null. Fine. We even have the method called get attribute names to return enumeration of string. What all different object names have been there? Okay. See, if you say set attribute and you use a name which is already in use, it will replace the earlier object with that name. One name, one object. Okay. Fine. The last one which you have kept with that name. And we also have the method called remove attribute. So this name becomes invalid. Okay. String any name returns void. So 4 set of methods for managing objects by giving them a name. We call them as attributes. Purpose is to share. Fine. Okay. And so servlet context, yeah, mainly this is what we have. Okay. And now we'll continue on Tuesday. No class on Monday. Fine. So there we'll look at the other objects, like what's there in the servlet request, servlet response. Servlet config we already know 4 methods. Servlet also we know the 5 methods there. And this is very important point, okay? These 4 methods. They'll be used in other places. Okay?